So for individualized funding, we don't actually require any specifics. Within individualized funding, people most often are receiving funding for respite and community inclusion. Sometimes people will also be receiving some funding for behavior support within their individualized funding. And we do have a policy for behavior support and safety planning that requires when there are what we call restricted practices outlined in a safety plan, which might sometimes look like the temporary use of restraints for emergencies, those kinds of things, that only someone who meets the same qualifications as people on the RASP are able to be the behavior consultants for signing off on and developing those safety plans. But we don't have a requirement for direct support professionals or direct support workers to meet any requirements for families who are selecting to hire people for individualized funding. Families make their own decisions about the support workers. We do outline for families under individualized funding some expectations around minimum expectations for like criminal record checks and things of that nature, but nothing around the specific training.
When you just said community inclusion funding and respite or respect, is that one thing or two things?
So they're two different areas of the supports that we provide. So we provide supports for residential support and community inclusion supports, employment support, and family supports, which include respite, and they are separate in our catalog of services. The way people experience the support might look quite similar. But with community inclusion supports, we have more of an emphasis on skill development and goal focus, where respite is really intended to be more a break for the family. Those of us who have family members who access respite, we also think it's often a break for the individual from us as the family, and a way of focusing on good and fun activities. So that's really conceptually how we think about the difference at CLBC.
Early school into the high schools, and it's really nice in the second half where you address more of the adult, because I know a lot of people are in that role now. Any links, comments, email addresses, community groups that you are involved with or that have been mentioned today, please be sure that at the end of the session that either Grace or Emily has a copy of it. Yeah, I'm not using that thing. Too much feedback. Because that will be put on the website, because there's been a lot of information. You may be thinking of things as you go home or as you speak with other people that may pop into your mind, and really has been an issue that's come up again and again is accessing who to speak to. Is it through internet? Is it through groups? Is it through the schools? Is it through Google? I mean, what really works for you? So the more information and the links that can be put up there, obviously the sharing can benefit maybe not just the people that are here, but all those that were unable to make it due to wages and whatnot, because we're so busy here. Were there any other comments or questions, anything that sort of popped up?
Just a comment that a gal that was at the last presentation, she's not here today, the young woman with Asperger's, who spoke. I got her link, and she's been sending me hundreds of emails every day, but they're fabulous, absolutely fabulous, and I have learned so much from her. If anybody needs information, she's fabulous. Really, really good from the point of Asperger people information. Really good.
I'm on Tara's email list.
Another email list that
Yes.
it's so.
She sends every day. She sends multiple emails, and some very, very important information there. So there are things out there that we wouldn't be aware of. So what we do on our resource page is to hear from people who have told us, this is really, really good. and we, you know, we want to share that with other families. So if ever we get really, you know, very happy families coming to us saying, you better put that on the resource page because it will help other families that are put on there.
See these cartoons or just art that people with depression have done on their depression and how they just fabulous thing. One, a cartoon of everybody with a bubble, they're all walking around saying, oh, everybody else has got it together, what's wrong with me? Everybody has the same thing. It's just so perfect. Really, really good information. She's just, I just have to say that because I get hundreds, but they're so, I mean, you can look through whatever, discard what you don't need. I've saved so much stuff, I've given people so much stuff. She's printed off amazing stuff from the United Kingdom and Australia. They're way ahead of us as far as jobs and placements and, you know, it's really, really good information. So just anybody, and the link is there. So, yeah, look at it.
Maybe one last thing before we close the discussion, or unless anyone else has a comment or question. Something I hear a lot about from families is the issue of aging families and what to do when you have a child who's becoming happy in a variety of ways. How to deal both from the family's perspective with the thought of leaving behind a child who is dependent on them, but also from the perspective of, you know, how do I build a community around this individual so that they are safe and that they will thrive after I'm no longer around. Does anybody have any thoughts, resources, ideas about what families who are in that sort of aging stage should be doing to prepare for that?
Well, I think one thing that came up, and it's come up a few times, is not to wait until you're in that situation. So I do have a family that, the first one I heard of that they had started a micro board. And of course, me being, you know, not that swift sometimes, I thought a micro board was something that you actually had. It's like a board of some sort. Well, it took me a while to figure this one out. But anyways, so they started, and they changed the board continually as the child matures because they want the micro board to reflect, well, she's not a child anymore, she's probably 21 or so. They want the board to reflect within her age so that her interests are always going to be met, you know? So we wouldn't want a board of, you know, 50-year-olds for a 6-year-old, and you wouldn't want a board, you know, like, you know, so it rotates and the members change all the time so that when the event happens, if they're no longer maybe able to care for her, she'll have a community behind her that will be revolving around her needs and her skills. So that's just one thing I heard of.
And how did they get help with it? Or
They asked people that were a BI working with them, a speech path, a doctor, a neighbor, or somebody that had some sort of investment with that individual.
So there is an organization that provides support for microboards and helps them
Yes,
develop
there is.
constitutions and become registered, and I'll send you the link for that. Oh, called Bella Microboards. The other organization that some families may know of is called Plan Lifetime Advocacy Networks, and that's an organization that sometimes has found really helpful in really helping to formalize an advocacy network around an individual, and it does plan usually assist in perpetuity beyond parents' lives. So a similar concept, but they actually have resources and infrastructure for supporting that. Sometimes it's done that way.
Yeah, the other thing that I've noticed that many families are not aware of, that there are government programs like the Disability Registered Retirement Savings Plan, the Person with Disability application process. There's many things that families may not be aware of that we need to talk to families about and get out there. And that's something that
I got a comment on that. I think people going forward, one of the biggest transitions obviously is from wife and I found going forward, and part of it had to do with the change in policy with the banks, and part of it was kind of lack of information from the social worker side of it. But our son is severely disabled. He's still mentally between the 2.5 and 3-year-old range. He's 21 years old now. He had a bank account when he was small. Over his lifetime, that bank account went away. When he became an adult, and he qualified for disability, and was going to the bank and trying to get him a new bank account. It doesn't happen. He can't understand the Banking Act. He has no quality. He does not understand that for himself.
So it used to not be a big deal to open an account for someone with a disability if you had a letter or if you had something. But what we ran into is that the rules for the banks have become more strict. So the rules around banking have become more strict. So in order to open an account for someone who cannot read the contract and sign, nobody would open an account for us. Eventually what we ended up was having a joint account between myself and him, which then became an issue at first with CLBC because he wasn't allowed to get his disability pension. He wasn't allowed to have anyone joint on his accounts. So we worked out an individual compromise for him. But if your youth does not have a bank account, you need to start working on it now.
Are you familiar with the representation agreement?
They would only take an agreement from me that had gone through the court.
It's not through the bank.
No, that had gone through the court system.
Because Michelle Dennis and I are in the same situation. We can't do a rep agreement with our child because he doesn't have the language to say that we can represent.
So the part you missed is when you have a child like mine, in order to be able to legally represent them, you have to take them to court and have them legally declared incompetent, and you're looking at $5,000 or more.
That's what it costs.
So when I went to so you used to be able to take, and I can't remember the name of it.
We're committees.
Yeah.
We have to have a committeeship, which is an adult legal guardianship.
Yes.
And even though they're ours, it costs us $5,000 to become adult legal guardians for our kids.
We have because you have.
Guardians.
Because you have to have them declared incompetent so that you can sign things for them. Because once he turned 19, he's legally entitled to make his own decisions, even though he's not capable. So just like if you have an older parent who develops Alzheimer's disease and can no longer make decisions for themselves. So what I ran into is, yes, there are agreements. Like we have an agreement for our son, if you're working through microboard and stuff where you represent them and you work with agencies and you work with CLBC on their behalf, the bank doesn't see that. Now you used to be, and what we ran into at the time with our social workers was the social worker said, everybody has an account, you're just being problematic, Mrs. Auden. They said, just go down and open the account. And I said, and of course I used to work in banking years ago, and I said, I'm not committing fraud. I'm not going to go down and say, he doesn't speak, but he read that. No, I said, I'm not playing that game. Eventually we did actually find a bank that was much more sympathetic to us and worked with us. And honestly, it's because one of the reasons is because the branch manager has a granddaughter with autism. But yeah, so that is a challenge, that if they can't sign and they don't have an account, and it can also be a challenge even if they do have an account, because they may, once you start setting these things up and doing direct deposits and they don't have signatures, if somebody questions on you on it, they may take their account away.
So you're guardians then? So for his
Like you would be for-
assistance, he doesn't have an account?
Yes, he does.
So he does, yeah.
Yes, through a unique process, but I'm just saying, if you're in our boat, you need to get in the boat soon. Because this is not something you'll be able to do in a month.
I think the easiest way to look at it is he has an account. We're more or less the guarantor of the account at this point, that whatever goes through there it stays. But I'm oversimplifying the way it works, but there's supervision of him over his account is basically all it works out to right now. There still is no fixed way to have it for him in the situation that some of us are in.
He doesn't have the banking rules and he doesn't have the CLBC rules, so we came to a compromise within the CLB system, the banking system. What I'm saying is that's something that you might not be aware of, and it's also something that your social worker might have not run into because it's fairly recent change in the banks.
And the other thing next time he needed it was when he was 19, so he could get his disability check. The banks don't pay so much attention if the child has a bank account through his childhood and just transfers to an adult account. But be aware that, like Michelle said, you can still be caught a couple of years down the road if he or she is required to answer to something about his account and isn't capable of understanding what responsibilities they have to be currently handling away.
On the humorous side, after establishing the account, we sent in an application for a MasterCard.
Yeah. Really, you can't sign for the bank account, but off you go to the restaurant.
I just, with us, like, in the registered disabilities thing, how was that real? Interesting. We applied as soon as we heard about it, but it was very new, so a lot of them didn't know what they were doing. But with the representation agreement, our son, he's not going to read his documents and stuff and sign his life away. So we do that as representation agreement.
But only if,
But he's signing
only if they can say to him, who represents you? Who makes the decisions for you? And he can name you.
He has to be present.
And he has to be able to say, my parents, or whoever the people are, these are my representatives.
My son will
My
never
son-
understand that
My
conversation.
son cannot say, my parents make decisions for me. So there are people that I know whose kids really can't say that either, like really don't understand what they're saying, but they've gone rep agreement because it's less expensive to do so. And what we know is down the line, if they're not around to do that, their kid is completely vulnerable. So if you have a child who really can't say, my parents make decisions on my behalf, or my board does, or whoever, you need to become EPs, and that's an expensive process.
So I just wanted to add and make sure that there's some follow-up opportunity for this. So there's an organization in the province called NIDAS, and they actually provide support for people who are interested in understanding about representation agreements. And I'm not an expert on the Act, but I do understand that the Act does recognize that people communicate in different ways, and they don't actually have to have communication that's verbal and consistent with, does this person represent you, yes or no? The Act actually recognizes that people can demonstrate in different ways that they have trusting relationships with people who are supporting them in supportive decision making. And representation agreement acts also name more than one representative, and they do have limited powers when it comes to banking, and it's around day-to-day decision making. And it's also very, very evident that banks and frontline staff within banks don't understand the Representation Agreement Act, and there's some gap there which can be a real huge challenge for families as they're trying to navigate banking. So I would encourage you to do some of the things that I think you guys are encouraging, thinking about banking accounts early, thinking about how that follows through into adulthood, particularly for the Registered Disability Savings Plan. At this point in time, families who are opening them for their minor kids are able to move forward with them. Can be a bit more complicated with an adult if you don't have an agreement in place. But I would suggest, before anyone make any decisions about what may or may not be possible for them in the future, you learn about agreements in your own circumstances and contact NIDAS. NIDAS actually has a really good PowerPoint presentation that they've developed that goes through what are some of the questions around whether or not someone can have a representation agreement, and that can be really helpful for people who are exploring this as an option.
How do you spell that?
You'll send us to.
I'll send the link for NIDAS, yes. And I do know that some families have been told that comiteeship was their only option. And there are, like in many different circumstances, varied legal opinions about this as well, because like so many other things, Representation Agreement Act is relatively new. We've had it here in the province for 6 or 7 years, but relatively new. And so not everyone is familiar with it as others. And it's also relatively unique within the country. Other provinces are looking to us for this sort of leadership in this legislative area. Other areas of the world really do think it's the way that we need to go in terms of legislation for supported decision making. And people who work in banks might not know about it. People who work in the offices for Social development might not know about it. So sometimes when you have these tools, you also have to figure out where you refer those other professionals to.
That's what I'm finding. Our bank did not know anything about it. And dealing with registered disabilities, they did not know anything about it. So basically, we're teaching them all the time. And that's what it is. But I think there's two levels of NIDAS for those who can, like my son, for instance, he, to a certain point, yes, he knows that work with parents. But there's the other level too, where they have no ability.
Yeah, there are two different types of representation agreements, and NIDAS really is the expert resource in the province who can help you to understand that.
And as you go on to have other things, like our son, we just gone through the process of purchasing a place for him. One of the things that people with disabilities can't have money. As you know, if their bank account gets to $5,000, then their pension checks stop coming. So they can't have money, but one thing they can own is they can own a home. And so if you're purchasing a home in that person's name, we had to have the completion to get through all of those pieces and financial pieces. Without that, no bank was going to let my incompetent son own anything. So it's a whole interesting process. I would say the other thing that I didn't know, I'm embarrassed to say, is that disability pensions start at 18, not 19. And I just assumed that as a